Hey guys, it's Balding here and welcome to another card discussion video or a discussion video in general because in our and my last two videos there were some comments about making a card discussion about Juliana, Channeler of Suns, and also a request of making a video on what to do against the Rush build against, I think more prominently, Fire Ninja Rush, how to win this matchup, what cards to play, what your playstyle should be, and I think these two topics fit together really well, so we will cover these two in today's video. So first of all, I want to talk about the how to beat Fire Nature Rush aspect first. And first of all, you need to understand, you need to know what Fire Nature Rush wants to do and which cards a Fire Nature Rush deck plays. So I prepared the cards which you usually see in all Fire Nature Rush lists. Like so. Command Missile, lately some people dropped it in their lists, but I think you should still play it. But of course, it's a metagame call. When you see a lot of decks with blockers, then of course Command Missile gets better. If you don't see them, then it of course gets worse. So you'll just keep it here. You might see it, you might not see it, but you should always keep in mind that they have this effect. But this is probably when they play it, like the fifth to, I don't know, 8th copy of Volcanic Arrows usually. So what does Fire Nature Rush try to do? Well, it pumps out all their stuff in the first like 3 turns, maybe 4 turns, and tries to win until then. If it like didn't win until turn 4, 5, then usually you win. So speaking in general, of course there are always exceptions, but the game plan here, Fire Nature Rush, play a 1-drop on turn 1, play 2 1-drops on turn 2, or maybe one of their 2-drops on turn 2, following up with a speed attacker or another 2-drop and a 1-drop and then a speed attacker afterwards. Mix in some removal spells for your blocker, for your, maybe you play your own Gaunter early on to kill one of their small creatures, gets removed. I'm leaving some cards out here which Fire Nature Rush plays, for example Poisonous Mushroom and the speed attacker Rickaboo, but I don't want to overload it. I think this should give you a general idea of what cards to expect from Fire Nature Rush and how to beat it. So usually your game plan is to survive. Just purely survive, answer your opponent's creatures, answer them early, survive until, like I said, turn 5, for example, turn 4, turn 5, and then if you didn't have already lost the game by then, you should be in a good position. So how to survive the early game? Well, you basically don't beat Fire Nature Rush. You basically beat Fire Nature Rush before the duel even starts. It starts in the deck building aspect, and you have to, depends on where you're playing, with which people you're playing, but it depends on your deck building. And there are usually 3 ways of axes you can, or 3 axes to combat the Fire Nature Rush, and the first axes are shield triggers, and there are many shield triggers, but I picked like the 2 most important ones against Fire Nature Rush, and this is Burst Shot and Aqua Surfer. Because when looking at the creatures Fire Nature Rush plays, all the 1-drops are 2k or less. The Rickaboo Speed Attacker is 1k, Poisonous Mushroom is 1k, Quixotic can be 1k when he did play like Volcanic Arrows on or Comet Missile the turn and no creature. So Burst Shot basically has every card except like Gonta and Magnus and sometimes Quixotic. So having this in your deck is usually pretty huge when hedging against aggro. When you look for a shield trigger to beat aggro, this is the card you should go to. If you don't play fire in your deck, then you can fall back to Surfer. Again, with his 2k body, it can run over cards like Deadly Fighter, Mushroom, and Rikaboo. And can also trade with the Sniper Mosquito. With Polygon, not so much because it gets bounced back to the hand. Can also kill the Quixotic because in your turn you can just play a spell and then kill Quixotic. So in addition to the body, you of course get the Spiral Gate aspect here in bouncing like a Gonta. I think the dream is like, of course, your opponent playing Deadly Fighter Breadclaw, then Gonta attacking with Deadly Fighter, first shield Surfer, bounce Gonta, kill Deadly Fighter, and yeah, you pretty much have won the game. Another shield trigger, which covers like this axis in shield trigger and also the next axis in like early answers, early blocker, early removal, and early threats by yourself. And this fulfills two of them. You can play it early to bounce a Gonta. Yes, you go down in card advantage, but all you want to do is survive the early game. You will get enough cards out of your shields, so you don't really care about the card advantage loss here. You only care about the tempo which this card gives, and tempo meaning bouncing your opponent's Gonta, so your opponent has to replay it. And then of course it has summoning sickness, so yeah. Another example would be like early blockers like Bloody Mosquito, which is perfect to combat the Gonta, and also the Quixotic. Can just trade one by one, which is all you want to do in the early game. Of course, it's a bit vulnerable against Volcanic Arrows and Comet Missile, but again, when people dropped out the Comet Missile, Bloody Mosquito is really solid here. And also your opponent spending a Volcanic Arrows means they can't deploy another threat like Gonta Quixotic, or even like on turn 3 when they played the Gonta last turn, they need to play it, they can't deploy a speed attacker. And also you can play your own Gonta, your own Quixotic hero, to fight against the 1-drops, to trade against the 2-drops, and kill them early on. It really depends on the deck, what you are playing, of course. Another early removal, like maybe the strongest removal in the game, in Miraculous Snare, comes down a turn later, but compared to Bloody Mosquito and Spiral Gate, but yeah, can answer the Gonta pretty cleanly. It doesn't come back, and yeah, usually just having the Miraculous Snare isn't enough. You usually need more cards from like the 3 axes I described. You usually need like one early answer, and you usually need like a shield trigger somewhere, or you need like multiple early answers back to back to fight Fire Nature Rush. And also Juliana can come in here as an early blocker, which doesn't get removed by Volcanic Arrows and Comet Missile because it can't be targeted, and of course blocks all the 1k 2k attackers really good, and even can trade with a Magnus. And the third axis here, which you need to, that at some point you need to take over the game and need to stabilize. And I think the best card to describe it, no, it's not Volcano Charger, but it's also a really good card because with the cards that are following, I will just put it at the side for the moment. Now I think I come to the most prominent card here in Skysword, and Skysword is pretty much the card which can stabilize after you get like knocked down to 0 shields, or even before. You usually will play it not on turn 5. You will play it a bit earlier when you get like your Brotham Tribe, or have like a soul swap in the mix, can recycle it, because this gets you quicker to your mass removal spells, which should come here. Maybe? Yeah, Blizzard of Spears and Apoc. We will talk about this card also. And that's why I also put Volcano Charger here, because with these cards you can really take over the game, clear your opponent's board. Blizzard of Spears will hit everything from your opponent. Apoc will usually kill like 3 creatures or more. And with Volcanic Arrows you can curve like your Snare, Juliana into arrows into Blizzard. Or you can ramp early with Brotham Tribe, Soul Swap for Skysword, and then play Blizzard, or just play like on Brotham Tribe, Skysword, and Apoc, have like a shield trigger too in the mix, and those should pretty much stabilize you the game and ultimately win you the game. So yeah, you need early answers, but then you need to stabilize, get rid of your opponent's creatures. At the start you want to trade one by one, like I said, with like Bloody Skeeto, Snare, Juliana maybe, and Spirogate, but then you want to remove your opponent's board, because usually you play 1 creature at a time and they can play 2 creatures in a single turn even early on. So getting like a 1/4x is pretty huge in this matchup. And also Miraculous Meltdown. With 6 mana it is usually too slow against Fire Nature Rush, because as I said, it's like turn 4 is the earliest Fire Nature Rush can finish, and most likely if you have like some interaction then turn 5, but when they're going first you won't get to the 6 mana. You need some kind of ramp again. Volcano Charger here comes to mind. Again, like the Brotham Tribe into Skysword thing comes to mind. But this is also like a really good card against Fire Nature Rush, but against aggro decks in general, when you have some setup for it. And you don't really need the mass removal, then you just need like 1 or 2 creatures on the board and then play Miraculous Meltdown, because the only thing they have is like Volcanic Arrows for defense. A thing which we didn't talk about yet is this card. This card again can help you to take over the game when your opponent has attacked with like Magnus or a Polygon, gets them bounced back to the hand, and have like 2 cards in hand, and you discard the Speed Attacker there in top deck mode. And yeah, this card is also good when played on like turn 5, I think, because you have to stabilize, as I said early on. Cranium Clamp doesn't affect the field, so you need to get rid of your opponent's creatures first, or at least stop them from attacking with Juliana, Snare, and so on, which I described earlier, and wait for the perfect moment to play this card, getting rid of the Magnus, and yeah, maybe a Polygon which got bounced back, and seal the game as well. So yeah, as I said, I described like your deck building process. Depending on what colors you play, you should include these cards when facing against Fire Nature Rush. Of course, when your deck is, for example, Hydro Hurricane deck, you will have more answers, like some really early blockers like Laura Giga coming down turn 1. Because your deck can support this card. You play 4 Mysterias, so you can basically play a creature out for 1 mana and draw a card with it, and you play Hydro Hurricane, so you get 1 additional bounce with a cheap creature. So Laura Giga has multiple purposes in this deck by itself, and also stops like the early 1-drops from Fire Nature Rush. But these cards here you can or the other way around, Laura Giga you can like only play in like this deck, I would say. So it's pretty narrow field where Burst Deck you can pretty much play in like every control deck that plays red, or even any mid-range deck that plays red if you want to, or even aggro decks. I think like the light Fire Nature aggro decks we saw like playing 3-4 burst shots even. Same with Aqua Surfer when you play water. Control decks play this card, aggro decks play this card, mid-range decks play this card. So yeah, these are a bit more widespread. So I will put these aside. I think if you have like any more questions about like Fire Nature Rush in general, or maybe the guy who wrote the comment has some particular deck in mind and wants to have some help on how to improve the Fire Nature Rush matchup, and I didn't include like some of the cards he wants to play, join our Discord, ask your questions there, or ask a question down below in the comments, and we will answer them. So now getting a bit more to the Juliana aspect, to the card discussion. Basically, when do you want to play Juliana in the first place? And you want to play it especially against the decks which have outs to your alternative card you want to play. So what is an alternative card when you don't play Juliana? Usually it's something like Belix. Usually there are a trade-off, do you play Juliana or Belix, because they are both light, both blockers, both 3k, both come down in the early game with like 2 and 3 mana, or can come down in the early game. But two huge differences, of course. Belix can be targeted, and with Belix you have to return a spell from your mana zone to your hand. Most of the time when you want to play Juliana, you would want to play it in a control deck, and usually control decks have more spells than your aggro decks, for example. Belix is also played in like the Lightwater Alzurnius version, where it's highly likely that you don't have a spell in your mana zone because the deck is built that way. But an aggro deck won't play Juliana, so you can't like compare the case where Belix comes down and don't bounce as a creature. It's unlikely. It can happen, of course, that you, I don't know, have a Baza Gazil and I don't know, a Farliga in your mana zone, and then you can play it on turn 2, but you shouldn't count on that. So basically, there's a huge difference, and of course that it can be targeted. So we have to keep in mind what other cards are they that target creatures that you want to have Juliana over Belix. Oh, not this. Unicorn Fish, for example, Soul Swap, like pretty much any card that targets like Comet Missile, Volcanic Arrows, Spiral Gate. Yeah, but all of these cards affect Belix and are played in aggro or mid-range decks, but don't affect Juliana. So if you want to have a card which stabilizes your board and there aren't that many outs to it, so you can basically say I play this blocker and I'm safe for a turn, then you should go for Juliana. If you have, like, as I said, another axis, you have multiple shield triggers, for example, in your deck, and you know you have a pretty high probability that you will be safe from this, maybe you can switch your Juliana to like a Belix to gain more value in another matchup when you don't face up like aggro decks. Also with Petrova, I wanted to mention that sometimes you want to play these cards in addition to your Petrova deck. For example, in Hydro Hurricane again, you would usually play some number of Belixes or even one, and Petrova could name Gladiator, but Petrova can never name Mecha del Sol, because Juliana is also a Mecha Del Sol card. So if you have Juliana in your deck and want to have like a blocker somewhere, I'm not saying Juliana is bad then, but it decreases only a tiny bit in value, just a little interaction here. Also, of course, when your opponent is playing Lightwater Alcyones, they are more likely to name Gladiator with Petrova, and when you have a Gladiator by yourself, of course, it's just better when it can block opponent's creatures like Magus and whatnot. Of course, there are cards which answer both creatures equally. For example, like a Seeing Wave, which doesn't target. Crystal Paladin, Scarlet Striker, they all don't target. They all say destroy all, bounce all creatures that have blocker. So they will get equally affected. So again, you have to keep this in mind when you play against opponents which are likely to play like these cards. Then it doesn't really matter if you have Juliana or Belix. Of course, they won't play like Seeing Wave for Crystal Paladin, but you have to keep in mind they will play some copies of it. So the advantage of Juliana gets turned down a bit. They still need to play cards like Aqua Hulkus, for example, which Juliana can easily block. Maybe they will have some other cards that target in their decks, so Juliana can be protected from them. But again, these cards affect either way. And of course, another thing is the power when your opponent is just attacking with like equally base creatures which already gain value, or is attacking with cards like Gonta here, even Quixotic after it gets boosted. Syrian, for example, comes to mind. Then it doesn't really matter if you have like one of these, if you have Belix or Juliana, both will equally trade or will just get run over by these creatures. So again, when talking about Juliana, you have to keep in mind in which surrounding are you playing. Are you playing against a really wide field where you don't really know what you're up against, you can only guess, then it's a really safe pick, I would say. It comes down to your own deck. Do you need like more defense, or do you need like a defense as well, but focus a bit more on the utility side? Belix in the late game is of course multiple times better than Juliana. And when you expect like a control field, a field full of control decks which have also cards like Soul Swap or Aqua Surfer, but don't waste them on something like or would not waste it on something like a Belix, it doesn't make sense to play a super defensive card when your opponent doesn't really care about it. But again, when you are expecting aggro decks, Fire Nature Rush, also some mid-range decks which usually play these cards as well, which can't really trade well with these creatures unless your opponent has a Petrova out. Then you should consider swapping your Belixes into Julianas in an aggro heavy and Fire Nature Rush. I would count it to aggro in aggro heavy metagame. Yeah, so I think I hope I've covered everything from both sides. A bit discussion about Juliana, when it's good and when it's not good, and when it should be played, and talked a bit about the Fire Nature, how to beat it. Yeah, another tip is win the die roll. Just be lucky, go first, and yeah, or when you don't go first, have Surf in your first shield, and you should be fine. I don't want to get more specific, like talking about some specific decks in which numbers of cards you want to use. Do you want to use like 4 surfers or only 3 or 2, and I don't know, some terror pits, which is another option for a shield trigger, or what should a split be, like 2 surfers, 4 pits, or 3-3, or the other way around. It's just too specific. It depends on your deck, on your strategy. So I won't get that deep here. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below. Join our Discord. Join our monthly tournaments. And see you next video. Bye.